2018 CDL Air Brakes Endorsement Exam Questions and Answers. During normal driving, spring brakes are usually held back by air pressure. In air brake vehicles, the parking brake should be used anytime the vehicle is parked. It is possible to have an air leak in one system which will not affect the other. True. The governor controls when the air compressor will pump air into the storage tanks. True. The emergency brake system uses parts of the system and parking brake system to stop the vehicle in the event of a brake system failure. If your bus or truck has dual parking control valves, you can use pressure from a separate tank to release the spring emergency parking brakes to move a short distance. A slack adjuster's free play needs to be adjusted if it is more than 1 inch when you pull hard on it. True. The driver must be able to see a low pressure warning that comes on before pressure in the service air tank falls below 60 psi. Front wheel brakes are good under all conditions. Tests have indicated that front wheel skids from braking are not likely even on ice. True. What is the purpose of an alcohol evaporator? To reduce the risk of ice in the brake valves and other parts in cold weather. The modulating control valve allows you to control the spring brakes. The S-cam forces the brake shoe away from one another and presses them against the inside of the brake drum. It is called the S-cam because its shape is like that of the letter S. It is not safe to drive a vehicle that has brake drums with cracks that are longer than blank of the width of the friction area, and that would be 1/2. So let me read the statement. It is not safe to drive a vehicle that has a brake drums with cracks that are longer than 1/2 of the width of the friction area. The most common type of foundation brake found on heavy vehicles is S-cam drum. The use of brakes on a long, steep downgrade is only a supplement to the braking effect of the engine. True. When is it not the proper time to apply the parking brakes? If your brakes are very hot. The use of air brakes on a downgrade is only a supplement to the braking effect of the engine. Air brakes equipped vehicles have an air supply pressure gauge. Too much heat caused by using your brakes too often can cause brake fade or failure. If your truck has a properly functioning dual air brake system and minimum size air tanks, the air pressure should build from 85 to 100 psi within how many seconds? 45 seconds. If your vehicle has an alcohol evaporator, every day during cold weather, you should check and fill the alcohol level. The brake system that applies and releases the brake when the driver uses the brake pedal is the blank brake system. The correct answer is the service brake system. So let's read that statement in its entirety. The brake system that applies and releases the brakes when the driver uses the brake pedal is the service brake system. The parking or emergency brake on a heavy vehicle can only be held in position by something that cannot leak away, like spring pressure. What is another name for controlled braking? Squeeze braking. The driver must be able to see a warning before pressure in the service air tanks falls below how many psi? 55 psi. Air braking takes more time than hydraulic braking because air takes more time to flow through the lines than hydraulic fluid. The most important thing to do when a low air pressure warning comes on is stop and safely park as soon as possible. The air loss rate for a straight truck or bus with the engine off and the brakes on should not be more than 3 psi in 1 minute. Your bus or truck has dual air brake system. If a low air pressure warning comes on for only one system, what should you do? You should stop and safely park and continue only after the system has been repaired. The air brake system for a straight truck or bus should not leak at a rate of more than how many psi per minute with the engine off and the brakes released? 2 psi. Both systems run off the same air compressor, so if one air compressor malfunctions, you will not be able to build or maintain pressure in either system. True. When you put the brakes on by pushing down on the brake pedal, air pressure is applied to the brake pads. When you apply your brakes, the air brake system works with an electric switch by the air pressure to turn the brake lights on. True. What do air brakes use to make the brakes work? Compressed air. If you do not have automatic tank drains, how often should you drain the oil and water from the bottom of compressed air storage tanks? At the end of each day of driving. All vehicles with air brakes must have a low pressure warning signal. True. The parking or emergency brakes of trucks or buses can legally be held on by blank pressure. Spring pressure. Let's just read that statement in its entirety. Again, the parking or emergency brakes of trucks or buses can legally be held on by spring pressure. If you are away from your vehicle for only a short time, You don't need to use the parking brake. False. Excessive heat in the brakes can cause the brakes to fade or fail. How should you check that the spring brakes come on when the air pressure in the system drops below a certain level? Park on level ground, chock the wheels, release the parking brake when you have enough air pressure, shut the engine off, and repeatedly press and release the brake pedal. To check the brake slack on S-cams, you should park on level ground, chock the wheels, and release the parking brakes. If your vehicle has an alcohol evaporator, you should check and fill the alcohol level every day during cold weather. True. When you apply the brakes, the brake shoes linings are pressed against the brake drum. Modern air brake systems are 3 different systems combined together. They are the service, parking, and the blank brakes. That would be, the correct answer is emergency brakes. Let's read this statement in its entirety. Modern air brake systems are 3 different systems combined together. They are the service, parking, and emergency brakes. Again, they are 1, service, 2, parking, and 3, emergency brakes. If the air compressor should develop a leak, what keeps the air in the tanks? The one-way check valve. How can you test the low pressure warning signal? Shut off the engine with enough air pressure, turn on the electrical power, and step on and off the brake pedal until low air pressure warning signal comes on. How do you test the hydraulic brakes for leaks? Pump the brake pedal 3 times, then apply firm pressure to the pedal and hold for 5 seconds. The pedal should not move. The S-cam forces the brake shoes against the inside of the brake drum. The application pressure gauge shows how much pressure you have when you are applying the brakes. When the air pressure falls to the minimum pressure allowed in the system, the governor prevents more air from escaping the air tanks. False. The air compressor stops pumping air at how many PSI? 125 PSI. Let's just read the statement. The air compressor stops pumping air at 125 PSI. Before driving a truck or bus with dual air brake system, the pressure in each brake system should be at least how many PSI? 100 PSI. Let's read that statement again. Before driving a truck or bus with a dual air brake system, the pressure in each air brake system should be at least 100 PSI. The brake pedal in the air brake system controls the air pressure applied to put on the brakes. Why must air tanks be drained? The reason is to drain moisture and oil out of the tank. What is a dual air brake system? A 2-brake system. One operates the front brakes and one operates the back brakes. Oil and water usually collect in compressed air tanks. If you do not have an automatic tank drain, when should you drain the air tanks? After every working day. What are the maximum leakage rates? Less than 2 psi in 1 minute for single vehicles and less than 3 psi in 1 minute for combination vehicles. How can you check the slack adjusters? Park on level ground. Turn off parking brakes. Pull hard on each slack adjuster. It shouldn't move more than 1 inch. If you must make an emergency stop, you should brake so that you can steer and your vehicle stays in a straight line. If air pressure is not built up fast enough within the correct amount of time, your air pressure may drop too low during driving. An air brake system is fully charged at how many psi? 125 psi. Let's read the statement again. An air brake system is fully charged at 125 psi. The proper method of braking when going down a long or steep grade after selecting the proper gear is to brake until your speed is about how many miles per hour below your safe speed, then release your brakes. Correct answer is 5 miles per hour. So let's read that statement again in its entirety. The proper method of braking when going down a long or steep grade after selecting the proper gear is to brake until your speed is about 5 miles per hour below your safe speed, then release your brakes. Total stopping distance for air brakes is longer than that for hydraulic brakes due to blank distance. Correct answer is brake lag. So let's read the statement in its entirety. Total stopping distance for air brakes is longer than that for hydraulic brakes due to brake lag distance. What factors can cause brakes to fade or fail? Overheating, low air pressure, and not relying on the engine braking effect. The brake chamber fills with air, pushing the rod out, which moves the blank, which twists the blank. Correct answer is slack adjuster and brake camshaft. Let's read the statement in its entirety. The brake chamber fills with air, pushing the rod out, which moves the slack adjuster, which twists the brake camshaft. For air brake systems in good condition, the air compressor should start pumping at about blank psi. The correct answer is 100 psi. Let's read the statement in its entirety. For air brake systems in good condition, the air compressor should start pumping air at about 100 psi. Which of the following is the most important thing to remember about emergency braking? The correct answer is, if the wheels are skidding, you cannot control the vehicle. And then the other distractors, or the two remaining distractors or incorrect answers, I won't even go over those. But let me read the question again. Basically, what is the most important thing to remember about emergency braking? and that is if the wheels are skidding, you cannot control the vehicle. So if your wheels are skidding, you cannot control the vehicle. That's the most important thing to remember about emergency braking. What are spring brakes? If the air brakes leak down, springs press the brakes to stop the vehicle. So these are springs that are inside the brakes that push the air brakes to basically stop the vehicle. Controlled braking is used to keep a vehicle in a straight line when braking. The braking power of spring brakes depends on the service brakes being in adjustment. Under normal conditions, in order to engage the parking brakes, the driver must first let the air out of the spring leaves. The storage tanks are used to hold compressed air. True. It is not safe to drive a vehicle that has a brake drums or disc with cracks or that are thinner than the manufacturer's specifications. Generally, this will be blank an inch. Correct answer is 1/2 of an inch. So let's read the statement in its entirety. It is not safe to drive a vehicle that has brake drums or discs with cracks or that are thinner than the manufacturer's specifications. Generally, this will be 1/2 of an inch. The stoplight switch turns on the brake lights to warn drivers behind you. You are on a steep downgrade and have reached your safe speed of 40 miles per hour. You would apply the service brakes until your speed drops to blank miles per hour. The correct answer is 35 miles per hour. So let's read the statement in its entirety. You are on a steep downgrade and have reached your safe speed of 40 miles per hour. You would apply the service brakes until your speed drops to 35 miles per hour. The air brake lag distance at 55 miles per hour on dry pavement adds about how many feet? About 32 feet. Let's read the statement in its entirety. The air brake lag distance at 55 miles per hour on dry pavement adds about 32 feet. Excessive use of service brakes results in overheating, which can lead to an expansion of the brake drums. The safety valve is set to automatically reduce pressure at how many psi? 150 psi. Let's read the statement in its entirety. The safety valve is set to automatically reduce pressure at 150 psi. To correct a drive wheel braking skid, you should stop braking, turn quickly, and counter steer. The air supply pressure gauge shows how much pressure is in the tanks. If your truck or bus has dual parking control valves, you can use pressure from a separate system to release the spring emergency parking brakes to move a short distance. The parking brake applies and releases the parking brakes when you use the parking brake control. The spring brakes used on the chambers in the straight truck will bring you to a stop when air pressure drops below how many psi? Correct answer is 20 psi. Let's read the statement in its entirety. The spring brakes used on the chambers in a straight truck will bring you to a stop when air pressure drops below 20 psi. Emergency controlled braking is when you apply the brakes as hard as you can without locking the wheels. In ideal conditions, a truck or bus with air brakes going at 55 miles per hour would require a stopping distance of how many feet? Correct answer is more than 300 feet. Let's read the statement in its entirety. In ideal conditions, a truck or bus with an air brake going at 55 miles per hour would require a stopping distance of more than 300 feet. Your truck has a dual air system, and one of the system loses its pressure. What will happen? Either the front or back brake will not be fully operational. When is it permissible to leave your truck unattended without applying parking brakes or chocking the wheels? Never. What are slack adjusters? An adjusting nut under the cab to adjust the springs. Why drain water from the compressed air tanks? Water can freeze in cold weather and cause brake failure. With air brake vehicles, the parking brakes should be used whenever you leave the vehicle unattended. Why should you be in the proper gear before starting down a hill? So you only have to apply the brake just hard enough to feel a definite slowdown. To make an emergency stop with air brakes, using the stab braking method, you should press on the brake pedal as hard as you can, release the brakes when the wheels locked, put on the brakes again when the wheels start rolling. What is the first thing you should do when low air pressure warning comes on? Stop and safely park as soon as possible. Some air brake systems have an alcohol evaporator. What may happen if you don't keep the unit filled with alcohol? Ice may form in the air storage tank and cause the brakes to fail. Repeatedly pressing and releasing, fanning, the brake pedal may result in the loss of air pressure. If oil and water collect in the air tanks, what can happen to the brakes? The brakes could fail. If the spring brakes are on, what should you push? Let me just read that again. If the spring brakes are on, when should you push the brake pedal? Never. Converters dollies built on or after March 1st, 1998. Let me just read that statement again. Converter dollies built on or after March 1st, 1998 are required to have anti-lock brakes. These dollies will have a yellow malfunction lamp on the left side of the dolly. You should know that your brakes are fading when you have to press the brake pedal harder to control speed on a downgrade. To test the air service brakes, you should brake firmly while slowly moving forward. The air compressor governor controls when air is pumped into the air storage tanks. The service brake applies and releases the brake when you use the brake pedal during normal driving.